I'm Dr. David Cheetah. The course number is CJ301 and the title is Intercultural Communication. The objectives for the course are really divided between those that serve LE, because the course has an R1 and an R3 designation, and then those objectives that come within the department as well. The idea really is to think about prejudice and discrimination, our stereotypes, racism, those kinds of elements that get us critically thinking about, or get students critically thinking about, those elements that are going to have them evaluating their own assumptions, or the assumptions that they're going to find occurring within the communities and the places that they occupy. So in the context of that one objective, it really ties to the textbook and the materials that we cover in course. The second objective, the R3 objective, is to use critical and creative thinking to address civic, social, and environmental issues. And in the context of our course, we think about civic issues as those that relate to how you might be a community member, your civic engagement, your right to vote, those kinds of things, how you're welcomed into your community. The social issues deal with interpersonal kinds of relational issues, the ways that we relate to our neighbors and our community members. And the environmental issues for the context of our course relate to the places where, as citizens, we live, we work, we play. So we can think about the environment as nature, but we can also think about the environment as just the places and spaces that we each occupy as our lived environments. And so in that context, it relates more to the research project for the course. And in the context of the course, the goal is to have students analyze a civic, social, and environmental issue, and then suggest ways to make changes that might improve that civic, social, and environmental issue. So for our course, the project this semester happens to look at Native American communities and how they engage in particular kinds of civic engagement, social activism, those kinds of things around, in particular, pipeline issues. On the day that you were in class, what we were looking at was how intercultural communication comes together with kinds of communication conflicts, the ways that we are in conflict with one another when we communicate, and particular ways that those conflicts manifest themselves. We were looking at two particular concepts. One is called the rhetorical construction of an enemy. We also rhetorically construct the other, the person who's not us. So those two concepts were what we were exploring that day as they manifest themselves in kinds of intercultural communication, about the need for intercultural communication, and part of that is sort of an awareness of self, that the way that we come to understand who we are is by understanding someone different from ourselves. In simple terms, you can't understand what is good without knowing bad. You can't understand up without knowing down. And you can't really understand yourself without having someone around you who is not like yourself, that is different in some kind of way, that is the opposite, or the other side, or the other sides. So that awareness of self comes by exploring and understanding and becoming aware of who are people who are not like yourself, so you have a way of understanding your own cultural development. In doing so, logically, you're also going to then become aware of someone else, which is also an important concern of this course, that dynamic of self-awareness is paired with the dynamic of awareness of other, awareness of difference that occurs in our communication contexts. I think also an awareness of and an appreciation to, or a sensitivity to, the differences in the ways that we communicate interculturally, so that how those differences are manifest in styles or practices of communication, the ways that we might communicate our own histories and our stories and our identities, the kinds of needs that we have in our communication, the way that nonverbal communication might differ, and the practices of that are across domestic kinds of concerns within the United States, but also international kinds of concerns. So if you're a business person traveling to Japan or to Korea or to Spain or some other part of the world, what are the ways that you're going to see verbal and nonverbal kind of communication practices practiced differently? And so that has a domestic and that intercultural or international kind of component to it. I think also an importance is understanding the relationship between communication and culture, because we communicate our culture in the things that we say, the things that we do, the things that we write, but we also, culture also is communicative. So when I do those performances of culture they say something. They themselves have a kind of meaning for others to be able to read and interpret, so that people see that the culture is the communication and the communication is the culture, that the two sides of that are paired together in a particular kind of way. And then I think finally just the hope that in all of that, it gets grounded in one kind of example, because no student in any class is ever going to say that I understand all intercultural communication for all different identity groups in all kinds of contexts, but you might have a deeper understanding of one. And like I said, this semester our goal is to look at Native American communities in the upper Midwest here, the Minnesota, the Dakota areas, and to see how their communication practices reflect their culture, and that their culture is, in part, communication practices.